All right. My promise to you today is I'm going to show you the financial habits to hit the numbers to be in the top 20% of the most profitable painting businesses. And I want to be clear, the numbers I share with you today have worked for hundreds of painting businesses. And I know they work because I've worked with over 400 painting businesses over the last 9 years, from startup to 10 million. So I know this works from experience, not theory. With that said, let's get started. So if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. One of my favorite quotes from Marcus Lemonis. Now, if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business, we can be pretty sure that you can't improve it. And I don't expect you to take my word for how important this topic is. Here's some proof on why you should pay attention. It's helped Brian go from startup to 100K. It's helped Christian go from 700K to 3 million. It's helped Chris go from 4 million to 8 million, and dozens of others who work with us to know their numbers and grow. In fact, over the last several years, painting businesses we work with on average increase their bottom line net profit by $78,000 and reduce their tax burden by $44,000. Now, once you know the numbers you need to hit in your business, it doesn't take a ton of time to get results. You just need to do the right stuff the right way. But knowing the numbers and how to improve the numbers is the hardest part. Again, which is why I've dedicated a huge amount of resources to the mission. And our mission is to guide painting business owners to financial prosperity. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's dive into the numbers. All right, so first let's take a look at what the average painting business hits on their profit and loss. And these are averages that are pulled from our internal benchmarking. And here on the left side, we have the typical categories that you'll see on a profit and loss. The middle column is the revenue group of 100K to 1.5 million and the associated percentages as a percentage of revenue for each profit and loss category. And then on the far right, we have the 1.5 million to 5 million revenue group with the associated percentages as a percentage of revenue. So the average gross profit is around 45% for these two revenue groups. 45% gross profit. Now, just to refresh everyone on gross profit is revenue, so money you receive from your customers, minus the cost to produce the job. So this would be the paying your painters and for the paint and materials. So when you subtract out that labor, that direct labor, job site labor, and the job site materials, what's left over is your gross profit. Now, gross profit is arguably the most important profitability metric for your painting business. Warren Buffett points out that companies with a competitive advantage have gross profit margins above 40%. Now, probably the next most important number you need to know is your customer acquisition cost. So customer acquisition cost is basically your marketing costs. So this might be Facebook ads, direct mail, anything where you're reaching out to get leads. Those are your marketing costs. Then it also includes salespeople, paying your sales force to close the deal. So all the costs associated with closing the deal, that's what your customer acquisition cost is, often referred to as CAC. So customer acquisition cost on average is somewhere between 18 and 19% as a percentage of revenue. Now let's go through discretionary earnings. And this discretionary earnings is basically a fancy word for take-home pay going to the owner. So this comes in the form of net profit or officer salary if you're an S Corp. So on average, for these two revenue groups, discretionary earnings or take-home pay, cash flow to owner, is somewhere between 12 and 19% on average for these two revenue groups. Now, it's important to note that the more roles you play in your business, the higher your take-home or your discretionary earnings as a percentage of revenue should be. So to illustrate this, let's take an example. Let's say you have Average Joe from Average Joe's Painting is the salesperson, the production manager, and the business owner. On average, he's making somewhere between 19 and 22% as a percentage of revenue. All right. So now that we've gone through kind of the basics for the averages that we see for painting business owners on these two revenue groups, now let's review what the top 20% of painting business owners actually achieve, because hopefully you're not just shooting for average, right? So here are the margins for the painting businesses in the top 20%. First off, you'll notice that gross profit is 50% or higher. Customer acquisition cost, again, which is your marketing and your sales costs put together, customer acquisition cost is around 15% of revenue. And then we have discretionary earnings ranges between 19 to 29% for these two revenue groups. So notice how we slightly increase gross profit and we slightly reduce customer acquisition costs by about 15%, and we're nearly doubling profitability. That's a huge impact. With those two slight tweaks to your financials, you're nearly doubling your profitability. So these are two levers you can pull in your business that will have outsized returns. All right, so now we know what the top 20% are doing. What can we do to achieve these same results? What do we need to do to achieve these same results? How do we actually improve our gross profit from 45% to 50% or higher? So there's two main ways to improve your gross profit. The first way is to increase your prices. Now, I do a lot of consults with painting business owners who are coming on board with bookkeeping for painters. And 8 or 9 times out of 10, the reason why they're not profitable is because they are not charging enough. And part of our process is to go through what they're doing to arrive at the price. Oftentimes, they're not actually pricing correctly. So this might seem like an easy concept that I'm about to go over, but it's crucial. And if you get it wrong, your profits are going to suffer significantly. So in order to hit a 50% gross profit, you need to charge your customer twice the amount it costs you to produce it. So again, your cost of services are your painters and your paint and materials. So whatever that costs you, you need to double that and charge your customer that amount. So let's run through an example to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's say you have a project that's going to take 100 labor hours and you pay your painters $25 per hour. Now, you'll need to factor in things like workers' compensation, payroll tax burden to add in that burden, which is usually somewhere around 30%. So we need to add that onto the $25 per hour to arrive at our fully loaded rate, is what it's called. So we multiplied $25 per hour times 1.3 to get $32.50. So that's our fully loaded rate. Now we take our fully loaded labor rate of $32.50 and multiply it by our number of hours that we have estimated for this job. So that $32.50 times 100 labor hours equals $3,250. Now, we also need to look at materials. And so let's say we got 20 gallons at $90 per gallon and $50 of sundries. That's $1,850. That's the cost to us. That's what we're going to pay Sherwin-Williams, Benjamin Moore, whoever. We got to pay them $1,850 for materials. So the cost to us for this job is the $3,250 for labor and the $1,850 for materials. So that's $5,100 cost to us for this job. Now, to get the price to charge the customer, if you want to keep it simple, you could literally just double that amount and charge $10,200, and that would be shooting for a 50% gross profit margin. However, if you want to maybe shoot a little higher than 50% and maybe target 55%, because oftentimes things don't go as we plan. And so maybe creating a little bit of buffer, you shoot for 55%, and then you might end up at 50%. So if you want to do that, what you can do is take that 5,100 and divide it by 1 minus your desired gross profit margin. So in this case, it would be 5,100 divided by 1 minus 0.55, which would be 5,100 divided by 0.45. And so you would charge $11,333. So this is a way to do it. I really am okay with other ways of doing it, as long as you're charging your customer around twice of what it costs you to do it, or if you're shooting for a 50% gross profit margin. The common mistakes that I see is not marking up materials. So maybe I just had a consult a few weeks ago where someone was calculating their labor rate, their charge rate. Their charge rate was about $65 per hour, and their fully loaded labor rate was $32.50. So it was basically double. They were charging double of what it cost them for labor, which was perfect. Great job on the labor. They were doing perfect on the labor. And then I asked them about the materials, and they said they only were adding 10 or 15% on top of what it costs them for materials. Now, they were shooting for a 50% gross profit margin, and we were looking at their financials, and they were like 35% gross profit, a lot lower. And the simple reason is because they were not charging enough for materials. They were only marking up their materials 10 or 15%. In order to hit a 50% gross profit margin, you need to mark up both labor and materials 100% to hit that 50% gross profit margin. So that's a common mistake that I see. Now, this reminds me of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, when he bought See's Candy, the single thing he wanted to control was price. He didn't care about anything else in the business. They kept running See's Candy as normal. He's like, the only thing I want to control is price. And then he proceeded to raise prices every year for the next 50 years in a row in 100x his investment. So pricing is a huge lever that you can really open up the profitability in your business. So he gets gangster glasses. Now, to be able to raise prices like Warren Buffett did, you need to have a strong sales process. So we're going to touch on this a little bit more, but it's easier to say, it's easy to say raise your prices. It's harder to actually put it in action. And the key to that is really having a strong sales process. All right. So the second way to improve gross profit is to improve efficiency, or how you're compensating your team to actually execute the work that you've booked. Now, from what I've seen, the best way to improve efficiency is to generate budgeted hours with each estimate using production rates. So Eli just went through that offer that Drip Jobs has going on. They have that production rate feature. That's a great feature that you can use to do what I'm about to go through. Now, let's just walk through what is a production rate. So a production rate is a measure of how long it's going to take a painter to paint a given surface. So maybe it takes 1 hour for a painter to paint 100 square feet of wall or siding, or it takes them 1 hour to paint a door or a particular type of window, or 10 linear feet of railing. All those things, those are production rates. It's basically how much time it takes a painter to paint any given surface. So when you're doing your estimate, ideally you're adding up the hours that it would take your team to paint the various surfaces on the project, whether it's the soffit and the fascia, the windows, doors, siding, etc. Those each have their own specific production rate. Ideally, cater to your team. Now, if you don't have any production rates, you're not familiar with it, the PCA does have a estimating guide. If you Google PCA estimating guide volume 2, there's a list of production rates in that book that you can purchase directly from the PCA. So if you want something to get started with, or you can get with your team and develop these production rates. Now, once you've generated those budgeted hours in your estimate, you provide mark it up 100%, or do your markup and provide the price to your client like we had just gone through before. Then you will want to generate a work order with those same budgeted hours and provide that to your crew with the expectation that they beat the budget. So they got to have those expectations. You give them that list of budgeted hours with each surface and how long it's budgeted, so that they can have an understanding, okay, this is what is expected of me. And then you want to do a weekly review of the jobs to see, how you're doing with job costing with your crew leads, and try to and hold them accountable to those budgeted hours. And some businesses have also successfully implemented a performance pay system. A performance pay system is basically you have those budgeted hours, and you can say, crew, if you go under the budgeted hours, if you do this faster than what is budgeted, you'll still get either the full budget or a portion of the full budget as a bonus, to basically incentivize them to be efficient and beat budgets and get rewarded for doing so. So up until a couple of years ago, a lot of folks were managing this in spreadsheets. Can get pretty complicated and not very transparent. So Protiv came out a couple of years ago. It's a really cool software. If you're not familiar with it, it integrates with Zapier, which integrates with Drip Jobs and things like Paint Scout. And so it pulls in data from there, and also your time tracker, like QuickBooks Time, ClockShark, Busy, pulls in the data from the time tracker. And so it has your budgeted hours from your estimate in work order. And then it also pulls in the actual hours from your time tracker. And then you can set how much folks will get for a bonus in there. And basically your team will have an app where they can refer to how much money they're going to make if they stay on track with the budget. And so it's a really transparent way to motivate your team to beat budgets. Now, the bottom line for your job site labor is that you have to know what business you're in. I had the opportunity of going to acquisition.com headquarters and spending the day with Alex Hermosi. And that was one of the big takeaways that I had. It was he's like, hey, Daniel, you got to know what business you're in. Now, if I were to ask folks on this webinar right now, what business you're in, some folks might say, well, I'm in the painting business. But if you really think about the primary task that you have to make sure your painting business is successful, it's really all about recruiting, hiring, and training a team to deliver services and marking up those services appropriately, so you have a decent profit. So that is, you're pretty much in a people business. It's not a painting business. You got to get the people part down. And that's a big part of that is compensating correctly and marking up correctly. So once you've consistently increased your gross profit above 50%, now you can start shifting focus to customer acquisition costs. And so this is the other big number that you got to pay attention to. As you might remember, the average was about 18 to 19% for customer acquisition costs. The top 20% are hitting about 15% customer acquisition costs. Now, ideally, your customer acquisition cost is 1/3 or less of your gross profit. So for example, if your gross profit is 45%, your customer acquisition cost should be 15% or lower. That's a key ratio, that 3-to-1 ratio. 3-to-1 or better of gross profit to customer acquisition cost. Now, there's 3 ways to reduce your customer acquisition cost. Now, the first way is to evaluate your different marketing sources. Maybe you have multiple marketing sources. Maybe you do cold calling and Facebook ads. So you want to look at each marketing source and track the revenue that you get from it, and then track how much you paid towards that marketing source. Like how much did you pay towards Facebook ads, for example? So let's say you had Facebook ads of $10,000. I'm sorry, you put in $1,000 into your Facebook ads, and then you got a $10,000 job out of that. That would be a 10x return on investment. That's the number that you're kind of looking for, is a 10x return. So that 10x, if you're not hitting 10x, doesn't mean that you should immediately stop that marketing. You should just take a look at that marketing source to see if it can be optimized. If it's significantly below 10x, maybe X or lower, there's definitely something going on there. And we're going to go through a few things to evaluate here in a second. But 10x is kind of the number you're looking for. All right. Now, the second way to reduce customer acquisition costs is to evaluate your salesperson compensation structure. Typically, a good target is somewhere around 8% of what they close. So this can be a combination of base salary and commission, or even just straight commission. And so a compensation package with a base salary might look something like this, where you're paying your salesperson $30,000 base salary plus 3.85 commission. Or if you want to do straight commission only, maybe the salesperson gets 6.15 of what they close. Either way, you want to make sure that their compensation is about 8% of what they close with the payroll burden added on there. That's why when you're doing straight commission, it's not 8%. It's actually a little bit lower than that because you have those payroll taxes, assuming that they're an employee. So the end state, in most cases, around an 8% of what they close should be what the compensation package comes out to. So make sure you dial in that salesperson compensation. The other way to reduce customer acquisition costs is to improve your sales process. And you can do this by looking at these 3 different rates, which if you use drip jobs, these metrics are in your metrics dashboard. So you have your set rate, which is basically when leads come in, what percentage of those leads are getting on the estimate calendar. So you can go provide an estimate. The show rate is what percentage of the folks that scheduled an estimate with you, what percentage are not canceling and actually showing up for the estimate. And then the close rate is what percentage are you actually closing a deal for those estimates. So those are the 3 rates that you'll need to really hone in on. So we mentioned before, if you're not getting a 10x return on your marketing, I would look at these different rates first to see maybe your set rate is really low and needs to be improved. And the set rate's what a good set rate is kind of dependent on your marketing source. But let's just take Facebook ads as an example. A ballpark set rate for Facebook ads would be somewhere around 50% or better. If you're setting like 25% or lower, you might need to improve your set rate. And this comes down to speed to lead and many other factors. But if you improve your set rate, the overall cost of your marketing will actually go down, because if you get better at closing the leads that you get, your marketing cost on your profit and loss will go down as a percentage of revenue. So this is an actual way to reduce your customer acquisition costs, is actually just to improve your sales process. So looking at that set rate, are you doing speed to lead? Are you setting those appointments efficiently and quickly? Then show rates, making sure folks are showing up to the appointment so you can actually present to them. So having some sort of software to remind them about the appointments. Close rates, are you doing in-home presentations and have a impactful presentation that's actually closing folks? So take a look at those 3 different rates. If they're significantly below benchmark, then take a look at improving, and that will reduce your marketing costs. So those are the 3 ways to reduce your customer acquisition costs. Look at your return on investment for your different marketing channels. You're shooting for around a 10x return. Dial in that salesperson compensation, somewhere around 8% of what they close, and then take a look at improving your sales process on those 3 rates that we mentioned. All right. So now once you've improved gross profit and customer acquisition costs, your net profit and your take-home pay will increase in most cases. So this is, if you get these 2 things right, gross profit and customer acquisition costs, most of the time, everything else kind of falls into line. Now, however, if you're still not hitting the profitability targets you set, and you have that 3-to-1 ratio of gross profit to customer acquisition costs, you need to develop a budget and evaluate your budget versus actuals. You might be overspending somewhere on your overhead costs. It reminds me of a story of Sam Walton. He was relentless about cutting costs, and he traveled to Brazil at one point, and this is when he was the richest man in the world, and he was arrested after the police found him crawling around on the floor of a retail store, and he was measuring the aisle widths. And people were like, oh, this guy's crazy. Let's throw him in jail. And it turned out he was just measuring the aisle width to try to get ideas on how to improve Walmart's layout efficiency. So you got to be relentless about cutting costs, especially with overhead costs. What do you actually need to run your business with? I know I'm guilty of like having certain software costs, like not even using the software, but I've been paying for it for like the last 12 months. So now is the perfect time to review your overhead costs and cut what you don't actually need. So in some cases, painting businesses are hitting their profitability targets, but they're struggling with cash flow. So this happened a couple months ago. I was working with a client and we're going through his profit and loss. And on his profit and loss, he was doing pretty good on profitability. And I was giving him that good news, like, hey, it looks like you're hitting your margins. And then he kind of stopped me before I got to the next part. He's like, hey, you're saying I'm doing good, but I'm struggling to pay payroll right now. I'm struggling to make debt service payments on my vehicles. Like, what's the deal? Like, why are you saying I'm good, I'm profitable, but I'm having a tough time to actually pay my bills? And this comes down to cash flow, which is different than profitability. Now, if you have higher profitability, it's going to improve your cash flow. But there's actually two other levers you can pull to improve your cash flow that are not profitability, increasing your profits. And so this reminds me of a story of Jeff Bezos and what he did with cash flow. He was on the late night show with Jay Leno in the year 2000, which was so long, 25 years ago now, crazy. But he was on the show with Jay Leno. And this is back when he was like a skinny, nerdy guy like me. He wasn't like the big buff dude that he is now. And Jay Leno was just making fun of him the whole time. It's like, how is Amazon still in business? They have not had a profitable year in the last 5 years. What are you guys doing over there? You have yet to have a profitable year. And this was true. Like Amazon on the profit and loss, you look at the profit and loss, and it was negative in the millions every year for several years. And so they were not profitable at all. But Jeff Bezos had figured out the cash flow hack. And he had very, very good cash flow. And so this allowed him to be negative on profits, but actually positive in cash flow for years. Not that I recommend this, but we can learn something from Jeff Bezos here. So what he did was he basically get paid in full by Amazon customers as soon as they purchase something online. This is, if you go to Amazon now, you have to pay for the thing right then and there with your payment method. So he's getting paid quickly. As soon as you want it, you got to pay for it in full. Then on the other side of things, his payment terms with his vendors, he didn't have to pay other people for an additional 30 days. So the folks that were actually putting the products on Amazon, he would pay them slowly. And this is the whole game with cash flow. Get paid from others quickly and pay others slowly. And the most successful painting businesses that I work with, especially who are looking to grow quickly, take a high deposit. So they take a high deposit. Often it's around 50% down to get their customers on the schedule. When they sign the proposal, they owe 50% down. Now, if you're in California or Massachusetts, there's some laws that prevent you from taking a 50% deposit. California is 10% or $100 or $1,000, whichever is higher. Massachusetts is 33%. So if you're in one of those states, take as much as you can legally and then do a progress payment when the job starts. But take as much money as you can as quickly as possible, especially if you're looking to grow quickly. If you have a aggressive growth goal in 2025, it's going to really help out to get as much cash as you can in as quickly as you can. And to illustrate why is when you take a higher deposit, especially 50%, it covers your labor costs because unfortunately you can't put payroll on a credit card, right? You got to pay cash for labor in most cases. So getting that deposit to allow you to meet payroll will really make things a lot easier for you. Additionally, you can get that money for your customer acquisition costs so that you're using your current customers' money to get the next customer. And this is why this is great for fast growth. So you don't have to be dependent on debt you can use your customers' money to grow. And so if you're taking a 50% deposit, just looking at the numbers here, 35% job site labor is typically what you'd want to shoot for as a percentage of revenue. And then around 15% CAC, and that adds up to 50% deposit. So if you're taking a 50% deposit, it covers you for your payroll, and then also covers you for your customer acquisition costs to get the next customer. So getting paid quickly from customers helps your cash flow, and it helps you grow without debt. Now, the other part of this cash flow equation is to slow payments down to vendors. Now, the easy thing that you can do is, if you don't have a credit line already established with Sherwin-Williams or Benjamin Moore store, go ahead and do that. Just met with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they were struggling with cash flow, but they didn't have any credit lines set up. And that's an easy way you can extend, delay that cash going out by putting the materials on credit to buy you 30 days interest free. Now, here's a pro tip. If you want to get another 30 days interest free, use a business credit card to pay down the vendor balance. So you get 30 days interest free from Sherwin-Williams, then use your business credit card to get another 30 days interest free. And again, the whole game here is to get paid quickly from customers, slow down payments to others, and that's going to improve your cash flow. All right, so let's recap on how to run a top 20% painting business. Improve gross profit. Number one, improve gross profit over 50%. Take a look at your pricing. Take a look at how you're compensating your painters and your efficiency. Number two, reduce your customer acquisition cost to 1/3 of gross profit. That's the key ratio here. Gross profit to customer acquisition cost should be 3-to-1. You reduce your CAC by looking at your marketing channels, trying to get that 10x return, dial in that salesperson compensation so it's 8% of revenue or so. Improve your sales process so that you're reducing your marketing spend because you have a strong sales process that's efficiently using those leads coming in. Step 3, implement a budget if you're still not hitting your desired take-home pay or discretionary earnings, to figure out what's going on with your numbers. And then finally, implement cash flow tactics to improve your cash flow. The whole game here is to get paid faster, slow down payments to others. All right, so now how do we actually change these things into habits? Like, what can we do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis or yearly basis to actually implement these ideas? So let's break it down. To improve your gross profit over 50%, first, do production rate estimating like we talked about, implement that, and then start doing providing those work orders to your team and do a review weekly with them of the job costing with your crew leads. And then yearly review your paint prices to see if you get lower paint prices with your vendors, and review your average labor rates and update your software and Drip Jobs or Paint Scout so that you have the most up-to-date labor rates in there. For reducing customer acquisition cost, evaluate your return on investment for your marketing sources monthly. Verify your salesperson compensation is at 8% monthly by looking at your profit and loss. If it's organized correctly, it should be on your profit and loss. So you can just check, okay, salesperson comp is around 8% of what they closed. And then review your set rates, your share rates, your close rates each month to make sure that sales process is operating on all cylinders. Then implement a budget to get desired discretionary earnings. You want to develop a budget yearly. So hopefully you folks are doing that around this time. And then each month, review your budgeted, what you actually planned, and compare that to what's actually happening, budgeted versus actual report, to see what's off track so you can make those changes throughout the year. And then finally, to implement your cash flow tactics, if you have a low deposit right now, I'd recommend immediately increasing your deposit so you can get that cash in quickly. And then review your vendor payments monthly to see where you can delay that outgoing cash. All right. Did I keep my promise today? I'm looking through the chat here. Got some questions. So what's included in cost of goods sold? Cost of goods sold, as we talked about, is basically your labor, your direct labor, so your job site labor, plus any materials that you're paying for the job site. So paint and sundries. Where should CAC be if you want rapid growth? Basically, you want your gross profit to customer acquisition ratio to be 3-to-1 or better. So if you have a 45% gross profit margin, you want customer acquisition costs to be about 15% of revenue or lower. And if you have that 3-to-1 ratio or higher, then you are good to grow as quickly as possible. All right. So I know I'm at time here, Eli. So
Yeah, you're good, man. You're good. Take a few minutes to answer some questions. There's been a lot of chat or a lot of chatter going on in the chat. There's a lot of questions, so grab a couple of those and take a minute or two to work through some questions. I know people got them.
Gotcha. I appreciate it, Eli. I'm scanning through the questions here. We do 40%. So is 10x return in marketing spend good? So the question is a 10x return on marketing spend considered good? I'll state it a different way, 10% of total revenue going to marketing. It can be good. I would look at your salesperson. If you don't have a salesperson, use an 8% plug. Like if you're the salesperson still, use an 8% plug because that's what you should be compensating a salesperson. So if you have 10% for marketing costs and 8% for a salesperson, that's a 18% customer acquisition cost. And so if your gross profit, it was 18 times 3 is like, it's over 50%, I think. I'm not good at public math. So 10 plus equal, so 54%. So if you have a 54% gross profit or higher, then you're fine. But again, looking at how the marketing cost compares plus your sales costs, adding that together for customer acquisition costs and comparing that to your gross profit. It's really the ratio of those two and how they play together to answer that question of, am I spending too much on marketing? Because the other factors matter in answering that. So somebody wanted me to go back one slide. So that is the habit slide. Do you have to collect sales tax on product markup? That depends on your state. Different states have different rules on sales tax. So it's very complicated on the different states. Okay, you're in Ohio, you have to collect sales tax on product markup. So I don't know Ohio's rules on sales tax off the top of my head, but generally, if you're paying sales tax at the paint store, meaning like the paint store is like charging you sales tax, then you don't need to charge your customer sales tax and remit it to the state that you're in general.